This is Belinda, a doll that was specially created for the Carmel Doll Shop based on an antique original of a Georgian wooden doll. And she was created by Karen Clohessy. She's just really wonderful, this doll. I mean, imagine if you had a doll that was over 200 years old, you would not be playing with her, dressing it. But this one, because it's made out of resin, is really durable, and she's just a lot of fun to dress. And I don't know about you, but she's the first 18th century style that I've actually worked on. So the costume is called Basset Hall. It consists of a petticoat, an overdress, and a stomacher, and this wonderful hat. And this is just a beautiful, beautiful pre-embroidered linen that the Carmel Doll Shop found for this dress. It's really just very special. The dress is actually, it's very interesting. The dress is actually held on with pins. In the 18th century, women did not use any type of button closures, maybe on a riding habit, but that was about it. Everything was held on by pins. So when we look at this, just imagine somebody walking around full of pins with a skirt this wide. I mean, it's kind of amazing. And this was the 1760s. This is probably the widest skirts would ever become. They would become a little bit narrower and narrower as the century came to a close. But this was the silhouette of that time, and it was supported by panniers. And the Carmel Doll Shop will have a kit where you can actually make these panniers that will be caned, and they will be able to support this really wide skirt. So she's kind of wonderful. I love her hat. It's trimmed with lavender and this beautiful linen soutache and blossoms, and she just looks like she's really ready for a reception at the governor's palace. So I hope that you enjoy this project. It's really not a hard sew. It's beautiful fabric to work with. It has a great hand. Your thread will just disappear into it, and she's great to dress. So have fun with her, and for all of you who will be in Williamsburg, I look forward to seeing you there. The skirt front, you'll have to assemble it, the pattern. It's in 4 pieces. You are going to join it, join A to A, join D to D, and then I would just join these 2 pieces together, or you could do it the other way, join C to C, join B to B. But you just need to assemble it before you cut it out. Now, cutting is going to be a very important thing to discuss because this is a very, limited fabric. And when you're cutting it, you just have to be very intentional about the placement of the pattern. This is this is a beautiful linen with these embroidered motifs on it. And what you want to do is think, what do I want to see in the very center of that skirt? In this case, with the way this fabric is cut, it will be one of these darker, the darker red, not the pink. Well, there's a little bit of pink in there, but the darker red motif. So when I was cutting it, I was just basically saying, okay, where is this going to land? This may seem like the center of the motif, and you can cut it as the center of the motif, but it's really visually, it's a little bit someplace over here. It's up to you, though. You're going to have enough room to sort of move this back and forth however you want. But again, be very careful when you're cutting this. Just be very intentional about where you're cutting it and how you're cutting it. And after you've cut it out, what you're going to do is there are 2 slits in the pattern. You're going to be making 2 very narrow hems on the side of that slit. And what these are openings for what you would refer to as pockets. Now, I think they even referred to them as pockets in the 18th century. And they were basically, women's dresses did not have any sort of pockets sewn into them like they would in the 19th century, where they could keep, their watches or something. So 18th century women had, and I believe that Denise Woodward's going to be having this as part of her class, they had separate little bags that they would tie around their waist. And that's what would hold all of their, sewing implements and their whatever it is. I was going to say their snuff, but I don't know if they actually took snuff. But, just anything that they sort of need to, their handkerchiefs, their, their lorgnettes, whatever. That's what they would use to hold their things in. They didn't have pocketbooks. Reticules weren't invented for or not used for a period of time before this. So what we're going to do is we're going to sew this down with a small running stitch. Now you're going to see a lot of small running stitches used in this project rather than what I always use is a sort of like a slip stitch on something like this, but you would see the stitching at this period. And this is just such a beautiful fabric because it just tends to just melt. The thread just melts into the fabric. You don't even see it. But it's okay if you see these stitches. So it's not like we're trying to not show them. This type of top stitched hem was what you would see. I'm going to use my needle grabber here because the linen is very firmly woven, and I think a thimble too. Let's see here. I'm actually taking my time for once because this is such a precious fabric. I just want to make sure that I get it right. Okay, you hardly even see those stitches on that other side. So we're going to continue to do that on both of these slits. And then they're going to be turned under at a certain point. We're not going to turn them under until we've actually seamed the front of the skirt, which is decorated, to the back of the skirt, which is not decorated. And the reason why the back of the skirt is not decorated, let me just make sure I've got my pin here. The reason why the back of the skirt is not decorated is that it's going to be covered by the back of the bodice with the back train. It's something that you're actually going to have to treat before you can move on to seaming the sides. So what we're going to be doing is creating a back placket, and this back placket is going to be, you've got you've got a line that you're going to cut. You're going to want to cut into the left side by approximately, I would say, 1/2 inch. And you're going to want to cut into the right side, as it's facing you now, by 1/4 inch. And what you're basically doing is you're creating a self placket. And the placket is going to be wider on one side and narrower on the other. And then I'll show you, once we've done that, you're going to take a little tuck once it's all done, and you're going to sew it across the bottom. Just a very sort of simple and easy way of creating this closure, and also gives us a little fullness. You're also going to notice that the back of the skirt is not as wide as the front of the skirt, and that's because the front of the skirt the pattern will wrap around partially to the back of the skirt. Now, you're not going to really see it, but I think just in case, I guess, the wind kicked up or whatever, she didn't want the back of her dress to be exposed. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to also be sewing this down with a running stitch. I don't think I actually have this is some linen thread I'm using for another project. You'll be having this beautiful cotton thread. The linen thread, even when it's fine, is a little bit coarser. But we're going to be doing the same thing, where we're going to be hemming this with a running stitch close to the folded edge. You can hardly see that on the other side. Once that's done, and we've done both sides, what we're going to do is we're going to, on the same fold line, we're going to take this and we're going to fold it over. You're not going to fold, it's not going to meet this cut line. It's going to go just a little bit past it, maybe like where the hem is. And you're going to sew this across with just a little running stitch. So it's going to be very, let me see if I can show you on the sample. It's just a very clean way of doing this type of closure. You know, you can see it here. It's very clean. You'll press that after you're done with it. So that's another thing. As you're working, remember to keep pressing. It's important just to keep pressing and keep this linen really wrinkles pretty easily. I think you might want to use when you're ironing it, you know, it's a natural fabric. You can probably use an iron with some steam or a mister. But I think that'll give you a nice crisp folds and crisp finish. So I'm going to continue to sew both the front. I'll go back to the front. I'll finish the pockets. I'll finish the back as we discussed. And then I'll show you how we're going to take some small pleats in the front of the bodice, front of the skirt rather. The reason why we're doing this is we're pulling in a little bit of fullness there, but I also think it's going to create like the proper sort of silhouette in the front. These probably skirts would not have been gathered, they would have been pleated. And because the skirt is so wide, it's going to be constructed in a slightly, well, not slightly, but a very different way than you would normally see, like let's say just a straightforward petticoat that was being gathered or pleated up into the waistband. So I'll continue doing this and come back and show you our next steps, and I will be right back. So I think the last step was we had narrow hemmed the pocket openings, and we had created this self placket in the back of the costume, rather of the petticoat, and made a little tuck here and pressed that down. We've actually stitched across the bottom of it to keep it in position. And then we sewed the sides, the short sides of the petticoat, the fronts to the back on both sides with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and we've overcast that. Then what we've done, about a 1/4 inch down from the raw edge and from the back, we've whipped from a 1/4 inch down, we've whipped the edges of the pocket up until we reach the raw edge. So you might want to give that a little press after you've done that. And then just on the top, we've folded in and pressed approximately 3/16 of an inch all the way around the top. We're going to hem that, or hem stitch that, only in 2 places, or 3 places really, between the pockets. So between this point and this point, it's been stitched down. And at the back, approximately 2 inches, I believe, we're going to be doing the same thing. And this will make sense when you see how the costume is constructed. So we're just going to top stitch that. I've already done this side. And let me see. Hopefully I should have a threaded needle ready. I don't know why I don't. I'll have a threaded needle. It's just a little running stitch that you're going to do. You know, I probably would anchor it a little bit here. You're just trying to keep this down. And then you're just going to do, this doesn't have to be teeny tiny stitches, but we want to minimize them from the front as much as possible. Okay, so the next step is going to be locating the exact sides of the skirt. And I'm going to turn this inside out first. Okay. So this is going to be pleated up when the doll is wearing her petticoat. But just for the sake of fitting it, because what we're trying to do now is we're trying to find the very center of the sides, or the very exact sides of each side, if that makes sense, the side of the side. We're not sewing this down because we're going to have to wait until she's in her on her stays and her panier until we actually finish fitting this. I mean, you can even base this if you want, just to keep it in position. You may change it after the doll has everything on. You've measured her waist. There's some expandability here in the front. You're going to pin closed the back placket. And then what you're going to do is you're going to find the center of this. And one thing I do want to say is that, I said that you could position this in the front where you want. I like it when in the original I made a little change and I didn't like that change. This really should be exactly in the center. And right now that's probably 1/4 of an inch off. It should be exactly in the center because this is the highest point. Even though this is an asymmetric pattern, your eye is really going to go to that center point. So I apologize for that. Hopefully it's not too late for you to make a little adjustment. And I'll repeat that in the instructions. So we found the center, and we are now trying to find our exact sides. Okay. I'm just marking those with a pin for now, because what we're going to be doing next is we're going to be pleating the inside of the skirt. I've already started to turn up the hem. That will be the very last thing you do is a narrow hem. Okay, so what you're going to want to do here is you're going to want to make a approximately 3/8 inch. Let's see. Yeah, that's about 1/4. Let's see. Well, 3/8 to 1/4 of a box pleat. And you're going to do that on the other side. That pleat should meet. Then you're going to take another little pleat, probably a little less, and that pleat's going to sit outside of this one. Okay, and this is where I think it gets to be maybe a little bit, just a little bit tricky. It's just us trying to get our heads around 18th century dressmaking, which is, you're going to see when we do the sort of the polonaise or whatever we want to call it, it's a little different. So what we're going to do is we're going to whip this together. Now, imagine, let me just try to get this in the camera so it's a little bit better. Imagine this is sort of like a little T-pin here. I don't know if you've ever used one of those little push pin. But what you're going to do is you're going to whip this together at the top. And the reason why we're doing that is that it's going to create, once this is also seamed together, it's going to create this little pleat that will allow the dress to have that broad expanse. Because basically what we're going to do is we're going to do that pleat, and then we're going to whip the top together only up until the point where we actually started stitching. So in this case, it's going to be here, probably about to that edge. We might just align it. Doesn't matter if we've already top stitched that little bit, but that's our next step. So I'm going to do that on both sides. Maybe I'll actually, of course, the needle's not knotted yet. Not knotted. I'll show you. And one thing I didn't say is that the turnover at the top, you're just going to leave that edge raw. It's okay. You'd be surprised how many edges were kept unfinished in 18th century garments. I guess only the ones that were really going to withstand a good, laundering, daily wearing, like under things, were finished, or anything that was going to show. I think they just didn't, it wasn't like in the 19th century where couturiers would have a gorgeously finished inner garment. You're going to want to pull this up fairly tightly. You're going through a couple of layers here. So make sure that you capture all of those layers. It doesn't have to be a really tight whip, but you don't want it coming apart. You want to make sure, again, to catch all of your layers. Okay, when we get to the center here, we're not going to sew that center seam, or rather that center where the fabric meets. We are going to just pick up the very edge of that point. I could probably do a better job than that, but I'll do it on this side and maybe you can see it there. Okay. I don't know about you guys, but maybe because I've been doing so much sewing lately, my hands feel a little clumsy. I don't know. Maybe they need a little rest or a vacation. Okay, so we're going to continue this until the very end. Again, making sure we've caught all of the layers. And we're going to knot that off. Ow! Youch! Yeah, I've also been getting stabbed a lot lately, too. Generally, I know I get stabbed a few times in a project, but this is getting ridiculous. Okay, so what you see here is one side of the skirt. Do you see how the back opening is pretty much aligned with the center pleats, which are probably going to come out? So we're going to do this on both sides. What we're going to do now, and I'm not going to do this while you're waiting here, is we're going to whip these two folded edges together across the top. And we're going to do this on both sides, starting at the same place, exactly how we did this side, because this needs to be symmetrical. And then let me show you. I think we can probably get just a little bit of a sense of what it looks like from the other side once it's all stitched together. So you're basically going to have these little pleats, and the pleats are going to create that, again, that boxy shape. Her skirts are very, very wide, and they were during this time period. But we're going to do that. We're going to whip this together. I'm going to come back, and I think after we're done with this, we're pretty much almost done with the skirt. I did say I started to turn up this narrow hem. I took about about an eighth of an inch, and I am using pins here because I just think it kind of is tiring for your hands just to keep holding something down while you're sewing, but the pins can get in the way too, so it's really up to you. I know everyone has their own way of working. So after I've done this side and I've done this side, I'm going to do the narrow hem, and it's just by doing a running stitch along the top, close to the fold, minimizing your stitches on the outside. And then I'll come back and I'll show you how this looks over Belinda and her stays in her pannier, at least the sample pannier that I have been working on. So I will be back. It's really difficult to get all of this skirt into the shot because it's so wide. It's really, really wide. It's a wide skirt. But you can see how those pleats have been formed. It just slips over her head. And I've adjusted the front tucks just to bring it in a little bit more at her waistline. And again, it's just going to, this isn't the pin you'll be using, but it is just going to pin at the back. And this is her hoop too. So I'm going to take a look at the bodice now, or rather the overdress. And it is also difficult to try to get it all into one shot because it's a really big piece. Basically, it's cut on the fold, and you have the back, you have a front, and then you have a mirror of that. It sort of like comes down into this sort of graceful sweep. When you see your pattern, if I can just find it easily, you're going to have to piece this together. And it's the same thing as before. You're going to have notes that tell you where to join it. Also in the pattern, in the sort of the lower, I guess it's the lower right-hand corner of the page, you're going to see a little key, sort of like a key plan telling you which part it belongs to. So hopefully that'll make it a little easier, but I think it's pretty simple to try to figure out how to put this together. I would say probably I wouldn't say it's complicated, but probably the trickiest thing is putting in these tucks in the back of the garment. They're really, really lovely, and they give this beautiful shape to it. That, I would say, is probably the only, no, it's not even a challenge, the only sort of tricky part of this. The rest of it is just really straightforward sewing. There's a little bit of like finagling that you're going to have to do at these corners, but it's not that difficult at all. I think you're going to have a lot of fun with it. So I'm going to start by, at least I think I'm going to start by saying that when I cut this, I'm not sure, I had some material for the sample. I'm not sure how your material will lay or what the pattern will be. It should be identical to this, but what you want is you want to make this as symmetrical as possible. So, for example, you're going to want to have, if you have a flower in this corner, you're going to want a flower on the opposite corner. In this case, it's going to be pink, one's going to be red, but that doesn't really matter. You want to have your flowers as symmetrical on the back as possible. And, this, I think if I probably could avoid it, I probably would have shifted the pattern down a little bit so I didn't have the blossoms at the top. But who knows? Maybe it'll be kind of charming when it's all sewn together. So I'm going to basically measure these tucks at the back. And these tucks are really such a pretty part of this design. Basically, about 1/2 inch. And this is all in your pattern. I felt that sort of marking is I'm going to mark my little dot here where it's going to be clipped into. I think marking really helps to get a nice an even shape or an even tuck. And this is all with the same, and the best part is you can just iron it out and start all over again. Okay, and then our next is going to be 3/8. Okay, and those probably want to be end about here. And then the space between is approximately 1/4. See, again, I need to get my eyes checked. There we go. That's not even right, but I think you get the idea. Gosh, it seems like I'm coming off as being really sloppy. I'm not. I'm just needing a new pair of eyeglasses. And my day job takes up too much of my time. I don't have enough time to do these things, which I love to do. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to be making tiny tucks. And the tuck is basically going to be folded. You know, I think I've done this before where I've actually ironed. No, it just means you're going to have to, here, just bear with me for 1 second. It just means that you're going to have to add your markings again, but that's fine. I have in the past ironed in my first pleat, and then I've ironed in my second pleat. Now, these pleats are really more like sewn down tucks. They're going to be pointing towards the center. So the ones on the left point towards the right, the ones on the right point towards the left. And they're not sewn all the way down. They're going to be sewn just probably, look at your pattern for a reference, but they're going to be stopping short about the waistline, which is going to give this sort of beautiful little, not really a Watteau effect, you know, like with the pleats that fell and they were open, but something kind of similar to that, and just really, really charming. Okay, so I've made my 2 presses, and then since I already have my line here, I know that I'm going to fold this in like so. So it's basically, the fold is meeting that line. And you just, you know, again, you take your time and go at your own pace. If you make mistakes with the friction, iron them out. That's why that's such a great little gadget. Okay. You can go back in and measure this and see, you know, where you think, if you think it's not even, or, you know, and just adjust it. So I'm going to sew this one down first, because the next one we're going to do, these pins are going to get in the way. We're going to be doing one right next to it. So how I'm going to do that, and of course I don't have a needle that has any thread in it. So you're going to have to bear with me. I wish I had someone to thread needles, or maybe I should just thread them before I start. That's probably a better way of doing it. And at least I can still thread a needle. Now, can I make a knot? Yes, thank goodness. Just clip this off here. Okay. So this first series of pleats, I'm going to have stop approximately at the cut line of the waist. And I'm just going to tuck this up here, this knot up here. And I'm going to do a little bit of an anchoring. And then I think I'm going to go even closer to the fold. And you're just going to do, you're going through a lot of linen here, so, you know, be patient. And I'm just going to take some little tiny running stitches up against that fold. Yeah, I think I need my thimble. You would think that linen would be relatively airy and open. But when you layer it like this, it's very, well, I guess it was very durable. Certainly know that the thread that I bought for the panniers and for the shift for Belinda is linen thread, and that is extremely strong. Okay, I think you get the idea. Okay, so that's our first sewn on tuck, and you see those friction markings, they're going to iron right out, so you don't have to worry about that. And then I'm going to measure the next, I think that was a 1/4 of an inch away. Yeah, I think that was a 1/4 of an inch away. So I'm going to go up here. Now this one we're going to stop a little bit shorter. This one basically went down to this point. We're going to stop this one about there. And that'll be shown on your pattern. So I'm going to take that fold again, fold it to meet that line. And I'm not going to keep you while I sew this one down, but just to give you sort of the idea of how this will work. You see, we're also going to, I'm not sure if you saw that little dart down there, but we're also going to be shaping. These little darts, little cuts will help to shape the waist. Okay, I'm going to fix that when I get to it. Let's just go in here. There we go. Okay, so I'll sew that down. I'm going to do the other side. And then I'm going to clip to this dot, and I'll do the dot on the other side too. You're using a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance for this. I'm going to clip into this dot, and I'm going to, once the pleats are done, I'm going to sew from the dot. I'm going to have these two meet together, and I'm going to sew from the dot. If I can just get them to line up. Sew from the dot all the way to the top, and then I'm going to press the seam open. And what you're basically going to see is it's forming this very sort of deep, I guess this is a box pleat. Oh, actually, I think does it go that way? Yes, it kind of tucks in. And then your back is basically going to be done. And there's more to do in terms of these seams and such, but that's the basic principle of the back. So I will get that going and come back when that's sewn together, and finagle with this a little bit more. It's almost dinner time. I can smell something cooking, so I'll probably have to put this down in a minute. I'm not the cook in the family. Okay, so there we are. Start of the back. Our back has been sewn together, the center seam, and we have clipped on either side of that pleat. Just make sure my pins aren't falling out here. And then what we've done is we've opened it up, so it is a box pleat. It's even on both sides. We're just going to pin that for now, because that's going to be attached to the bodice lining once it's done. We sewed together the shoulder seam, and we've pressed it open. And now this is what I think maybe a little bit tricky is in your pattern, you've got two little darts here, one at the waistline, at the front and the back. What you're going to do is you're going to sew those together with a very narrow seam allowance and then really tightly overcast it to prevent it from pulling apart. And you're going to do the same thing here on the back side. It's not as easy to do in paper as it is in fabric, but you're going to do that on one side first. And then basically you're going to align the side, and you're going to align those darts, and then you're going to find the center of the side of the dress. And then we're going to do almost exactly the same thing as we did for the petticoat, but we're not going to whip it together. We're going to sew it together with a seam. So if you can imagine, we're going to go from this point all the way to this point, and we're going to pivot, and we're going to go all the way here, and we're going to dye where it actually dies into the box pleat and the 1/4-inch pleats, the side pleats. So, you could sew this together now. I think I probably will sew it across, making sure that I'm not sewing it down to either side of this seam. It has to remain sort of again, that little T shape. And that is basically the side construction of the dress. So you do that on both sides. I've just pinned it here just to show you where those darts are. And after we're done with that, we will probably move on to the sleeves, and then we'll do the bodice lining, and then I'll show you how to finish the edges of this. It's very simple. It's just basically, I don't know if you can see that on the camera, we'll do it, but it's just basically turning this up, the seam allowance up, and slip stitching it in place, because we have a row of this linen soutache that we're going to put onto the front that will hide our stitching lines. And then we are very close to being completed with the body, with the bodice, but we still have to do our sleeves, and we still have to line it, and we still have to do our trim. And I will do those things now, but I just want to show you how that creates this sort of like nice side angle and a nice taper here at the waist and at the center back, or the back of the waist. Okay. Once we've got this in a good place, just in terms of basted together, imagine this has been basted together across the top. Okay, you're not sewing it down to anything. You're going to basically then just press that pleat. It's gonna fall pretty gracefully, but you just want to press that pleat, and I probably do it. I wouldn't do it all the way down. I probably would do it to about maybe here, or maybe even here, and the rest of it's just going to sort of open up and flow. So I will close up the side, the top. I will do the side pleat. I'll do it on the other side, and then I will be back with you to show you the sleeves.
Remember to like, subscribe, and hit that notification button.